Okay, in this lecture we're going to talk about the domain of a function. So this lecture is domain. So first off, what is domain? Domain is any number you can actually plug into a function. So where is it defined? That's what domain is. Now there are two things you can't do in math, and these are the only two things that you're going to need to know. So the two things you can't do. First thing, can't divide by 0. That's something that you're not going to be allowed to do. Dividing by 0 is undefined. Second thing you can't do is take an even root of a negative number. So those are the only two things you can't do. Can't divide by 0, can't take an even root of a negative number. So that would be something like the square root of negative 1 or the fourth root of negative 2. Any even root, so 2, 4, 6, can't do that of a negative number. So how you find the domain of a function is by using these two ideas. So we'll do some steps here. So to find domain, first thing you're going to do is draw the number line. So draw the real number line. Second thing you're going to do is ask yourself, does my function have any denominators? So are there any places in my function where I'm dividing by anything? If the answer to this question is yes, set them to 0, solve for x, and mark those out on the number line. So that's your second step. You're going to say, are there any places where I'm dividing by anything? If the answer is yes, set those denominators equal to 0, solve for x, mark those out on your number line. Third thing you're going to ask yourself is, are there any even roots? So are there any square roots, any fourth roots, any sixth roots, anything like that? If the answer is yes, you're going to set them less than 0. Solve for x, and mark it out. So if you have any sort of even roots, so 2, 4, 6, any of those, set what's inside of the root less than 0, solve for x, mark it out on your number line. The last step here, this is step 4, is what isn't marked out. So what is not marked out is your domain. Is the domain. So basically what we're doing is we're starting with all real numbers, that's our number line. Then we're saying what is bad, mark out all the bad things, what's left is everything that's good. So let's do some examples. Example 1. Let's find the domain of f of x is 1 over x squared minus 9. So I'm going to go through my steps. First thing, draw the real number line. And I'll draw that here. There's my real number line. Now, step 2. Do I have any denominators in my problem? Yes, I do. So set it equal to 0. And now solve for x. So x squared is 9, which means that x is plus or minus 3. Now come up here and mark those out. Moving on to step 3, do I have any even roots? Well, I don't have any roots in my problem, so the answer there is no. So I go on to step 4. What is not marked out is my domain. So let me get a different color here. What is not marked out? All of this was not marked out, all of this was not marked out, and all of this was not marked out. So if I'm going to write that as an interval, we're going to call it d sub f, meaning the domain of f. I have my first piece, negative infinity to negative 3. Then I have my second piece, negative 3 to 3. And then I have my third piece, 3 to infinity. One thing I do want to note, I'm using parentheses because I do not include negative 3 or 3. So all of these are parentheses because I marked out negative 3 and 3. I don't want to include those in my domain. Let's try a different one. How about f of x is the square root of 2x plus 4 plus 1 over x minus 1. So I want to find the domain of this function. First thing I'm going to do, draw my number line. Okay, step 1 is complete. Now we move on to step 2. Do I have any denominators in this problem? I do. I have this x minus 1, so I set it equal to 0. Solve for x. I get x is equal to 1. So I'll come up here, positive 1, and mark out 1. Next, I ask myself, do I have any even roots? I do. I have a square root. So I take what's inside the square root and set it less than 0. Now solve for x, so I'll get 2x is less than minus 4, x is less than 2. So I'll come up here, minus 2, here's negative 2. I don't want to mark out negative 2. This says mark out everything strictly less than it. So there's everything that I'm going to mark out. Now what's left over? Negative 2 was left over, also everything up to 1, and then also all of this. So that's my domain. So my domain is going to be negative 2 up to 1, not including 1, but I did include negative 2 because I didn't mark it out. It's purple up here. Together with 1 to infinity. Let's try one more example. So example 3. Let's find the domain of the function 2x plus 1 over the square root of 3x plus 6 plus 1 over x. So same process, draw my number line. Next, do I have any denominators? Well, yes, I have 2 denominators, so I'm going to set each of them equal to 0. So my first denominator was just x. So x is equal to 0. Come up here, there's 0, mark it out. My other denominator is the square root of 3x plus 6. Set that equal to 0. How do I solve for x? First thing, square both sides. Square both sides and you get 3x plus 6 is 0 because 0 squared is 0. Subtract 6, 3x is minus 6, divide by 3, x is minus 2. So I'll come up here to minus 2 and mark that out. So I've taken care of both of my denominators. Now I go on to say, are there any even roots in my problem? There are. There's 1, there's a square root, so I set what's inside the radical less than 0. So 3x plus 6, set that less than 0. And now let's solve for x. So 3x is less than negative 6, so x is less than negative 2. So now I'll come up here and mark out everything less than negative 2. Now what did I not mark out? Let's maybe shade that in purple. I didn't mark out anything between negative 2 and 0, and I didn't mark out anything above 0. So that tells me that the domain of my function, so d sub f, is going to be negative 2 to 0. I don't include negative 2, I also don't include 0 because I marked them both out, together with 0 to infinity. So that would be my domain. So in general, when you're trying to find the domain, use those steps. So figure out, do I have any denominators? Set all the denominators equal to 0. Mark it out. Do I have any radicals? Set everything inside the radical less than 0. Mark it out. What you did not mark out is your domain.